Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Williams, and I am a certified occupational therapy assistant working in outpatient pediatrics, and I am also an OTD student at Concordia University. Today, I'm going to be providing you guys with a webinar about DIR Floortime, a therapeutic technique that I use in my practice, and I'm excited to share about it with you guys. Some objectives for this webinar are, at the end of this webinar, describe the components of the acronym DIR. At the end of this webinar, identify 2 governing bodies that certify DIR floortime providers. At the end of this webinar, identify who can provide DIR floortime techniques and label the professions. And 4, at the end of this webinar, identify the possible number of engagement levels attainable by an individual. So to start off, I did take time to make a note-taking document. This QR code will bring you to a Google Doc. So if you could please save it as a Word document or save it to your own Google Doc so that if you edit it, it won't make corrections to the original document. But this should also help you throughout the presentation. So let's start by talking about what is DIR. So DIR was created by Stanley Greenspan and Serena Wider. It is rooted in human development and uses the power of relationships and emotional connections to fuel that development. In pediatrics, this typically is a child-led, play-based approach, and it's where we follow the lead of the child using their interests to develop relationships and promote their engagement. So the D stands for developmental, and the D describes development from the perspective of the individual, where they are and where they're headed. It's important to understand the unique developmental process, and this means allows them space for each person to be respected and guided in their own personal developmental journey. I stands for individual differences. So the I describes the unique ways in which each person takes in, regulates, responds to, and understands the world around them. The R stands for relationship. So the R describes how relationships fuel our development. Naturally, humans are social beings, and relationships are key to our development. The whole DIR floortime approach harnesses the key emotional aspect of these relationships to promote the development. The floortime piece comes from the play-based approach. So when we think about the developmental, how they're developing, the individual's differences, and the relationship between you and the individual, all using that in a floortime play-based approach will really help them highlight the power of the relationships to fuel their development. So the DIR floortime approach also does not necessarily think in terms of rewards. So that's more of a behavioral approach. And we can get more into detail with this in a few slides. But it's also important to note that the DIR floortime approach requires a lot of patience from the provider, and it requires a lot of energy from the client. So keep that in mind as you're using this approach as well. In the DIR floortime approach, we think about levels. So these levels are not, once you're at level 1, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can then skip to level 6. Typically, what we see is it's in the shape of a ladder. So in order to get to level 6, you need to then first be at level 1. So level 1 would be regulation. So self-regulation and interest in the world. And this typically shows or develops developmentally around 0 to 3 months old. Level 2, engaging and relating. This typically shows between 2 and 7 months old. Level 3, purposeful two-way communication and intentionality. And this typically develops around 3 to 10 months old. Level 4 is shared problem solving and complex communication. And this typically develops between 9 and 18 months old. Level 5 is symbolic thinking or using symbols to create emotional ideas. And this typically develops between 18 to 48 months of age. And level 6, emotional thinking, is logical thinking and building bridges between their ideas. And this typically presents anywhere between 1 to 4.5 years old. So the reason I have these levels 1 through 6 highlighted in black is that these are the most prominent levels that we typically see in pediatrics. The other remaining 3 levels are also technically pediatric levels, though in my practice setting, with outpatient pediatrics and working primarily with children on the autism spectrum, I don't necessarily see too much of levels 7, 8, 9, and then onward. Level 7 is triangular thinking. So this is using multiple perspectives. Developmentally, this doesn't occur until 4 to 6 years of age. Level 8, the gray area, and this is thinking of new ways to problem solve. This generally doesn't develop until 6 to 10 years old. And then reflective thinking is being able to compare themselves to others and saying something like, that's okay for them, but it's not okay for me. And this typically occurs around age 9. There are technically 16 levels in the DIR approach. But like I said before, when we're thinking about pediatrics, typically we don't go past level 9 or level 6. That's my dog. I'm so sorry. So when you're looking at the levels, I do want to have you picture either a pyramid, like in this image, or a ladder. So in a ladder, you can climb up, but you can also climb back down. So the thing that I really want to emphasize is that you can climb up all the way to level 3 and have that two-way purposeful communication with a client, but then they can also go back down into needing that regulation before shared attention. So for example, if I'm engaging with a client and I'm blowing bubbles with them, and then they're showing purposeful two-way communication, like I want the bubbles, I want to keep playing with the bubbles. And then something happens where then they need some more support in regulation, then that would mean that they would go back down to level 1. And then you would work your way back up with them back to, wherever their level was before. Here is another way to look at the developmental levels. So this is provided by ICDL, which is one of the governing bodies that we're going to discuss later in this presentation. So again, it's just another way to look at it. There's stepping stones rather than a pyramid. So you begin at regulation and shared attention, and you can climb all the way up to level 9, 10, 11, but then you might come back down. And that's okay, and that's to be expected. So another example is if I'm engaging with my client and he's excited about tapping on the window, then I'll join in and tap on the window with him. Then he might look at me and try something different, and then I'll match him. So we can keep going back and forth, and then that would be engaging and relating. And then we could potentially work our way up to shared problem solving by trying to get to the window when there's something in the way or something like that. Here's some more information on the levels if you are interested in specifically just the levels of the DIR Floortime approach. This QR code will take you directly to ICDL's website, and they have a lot of really great resources regarding each level. They describe it in detail, especially the levels that are past level 9, which is what we were talking about. And those go on to adulthood. So it's very interesting and really good information if you want to learn more about that. So who can provide DIR? Really, anyone can provide DIR floor time and use the therapeutic approach in their practice. But in order to call yourself a DIR floor time provider, you need to, from a legality standpoint, you need to then receive a certification from one of our two governing bodies, which we will discuss soon, but those are Profectum and ICDL. So once you receive those DIR floor time provider certifications, then you can legally say that you are a DIR floor time provider. Since I am not technically a DIR floor time provider, but I have taken one of the courses through ICDL that really gives a good intro, and even the level 2 intro class, so that I can understand what DIR floor time is and how to implement it in my practice. I do personally feel comfortable saying that in my notes and my documentation, though I do not state myself as a provider. I say that I've used DIR techniques rather than state that I'm a certified provider, because I'm not. So if you do state that you're a provider when you're not, it might cause some problems. It, like any other certification, it gives you some extra credentials to your name. And so that could be something that could get you into some legal trouble down the line if you don't fully complete those certifications. So some examples of people who can provide DIR floor time include occupational therapists, speech pathologists, special education teachers, child psychologists, and other mental health practitioners. But this is not limited to the people who can do it. Parents can provide DIR floor time as well. Really, anyone can provide DIR floor time. It's just a great approach to be able to interact and engage with children, specifically who are on the autism spectrum. Really thrive with this model. So I want to allow you guys some collaboration time. So I encourage you to pause the webinar after I read these questions, discuss amongst yourselves in your groups if you are in a group, or write down the answers and then come back and we can discuss it in the webinar. So I encourage you to pause it after I read them. What does the D stand for in the acronym DIR? How many prominent levels are there on the DIR pyramid that we discussed? And who can provide DIR floor time? You can pause it. Welcome back. I hope you guys had a really good collaboration time. So the D for DIR floor time stands for developmental, and this is just kind of where the child falls in terms of their development. How many prominent levels are there on the pyramid or the ladder? There are technically 16, but the ones that we discussed today as being the prominent levels are levels 1 through 6. And who can provide DIR floor time? Really, anybody can provide the approach DIR floor time, but in order to say that you are a provider, you need to have the proper certification. What are circles of communication? This is something that we really want to emphasize when we're talking about DIR. So a circle of communication is anything where you're getting the attention of the individual and they are responding back to you. The goal is to have a rhythm of communication, though it can be verbal or nonverbal. It can be using gestures, it can be using body language, it can be using eye gaze, vocalizations. It doesn't necessarily have to be the standard, what you would picture as typical communication. So this would be where you as the therapist is sending a communication to a child or the client. They are receiving and responding to that communication. Then you as the clinician are responding to that and allowing the child to then try to respond once more. So what this could look like in a clinical sense is, for example, if I'm working with a client and I grab bubbles and I try to open the tube of bubbles, if the client turns to me, sees me trying to open the bubbles, I can pretend like the bubbles are really hard to open and use my affect, which is a main component of DIR, use my affect to open the bubbles and say, open, or act like I'm struggling so that they can then try and help facilitate, or they're engaged with watching me try to open the bubbles. This could be a circle of communication, because if I have them with their eye gaze until they walk away and they turn away, then the circle of communication might be closed. So in that sense, I waited too long for me to actually open the bubbles and try to continue the circle of communication. So if they're still looking at me when I'm trying really hard to open it and I see I'm kind of losing them, they might be looking off somewhere else and coming back to me, then I can try opening the bubbles, pulling them out, and pausing before taking a breath. If they're looking at me, then I would want them to maybe give me some kind of eye gaze, some kind of level of excitement, a way to show me that they're ready for me to then blow the bubbles. Perhaps they would say more or say bubbles, or if they're non-speaking, maybe they would show more with their hands or make the blowing motion of themselves blowing the bubbles to try to get me to then blow the bubbles. What I don't want in this situation is me opening the bubbles, having the child come up to me, taking the bubbles and walking away, because then I'm just being used as a tool and I'm not really using my skills to get them to communicate and engage with me to climb up that developmental ladder. So again, the goal is to have a rhythm of communication so it can stop, it can restart. And these can be anywhere between verbal and also gestures, eye gaze, anything of that sense. Something that's really important to remember when you're doing DIR floor time is that it takes a lot of trial and error. So you might need to trial out how much wait time you're going to give the child before they respond, before you respond. So for example, if I'm opening the bubbles and I'm trying really hard to open them and the kid just walks away, then maybe I waited too long. And so I know next time I'm not going to allow that much wait time because I lost them in that interaction. So really just working on, again, looking back at their developmental individual differences and working on that relationship. All three of those components really shine through when you're working on the circles of communication. So this is a video. If you follow the QR code, there's a 40-second video of Greenspan just sitting with a parent and explaining to her how to interact with her child. I just want you to watch the video and try and count the amount of circles of communication that you see, and then come back to this webinar and we can discuss it. Thanks for joining again. So though after watching this video, it could be argued that the little girl was trying to communicate with her mom by poking her arms to get them open. Really, there was only one full circle of communication completed in this video, and that was where mom put her arms around the daughter. The daughter turned towards mom. Mom said, "Open," and continuously repeated that. And then eventually the daughter attempted to say open. So that right there was the entire circle of communication. Though I do, in my practice, depending on where the child is developmentally and what our relationship is, I might then accept the child poking my arms as a way for her to communicate to me, open your arms. And then I would honor that. But it does sound like with the coaching of Greenspan, that we were trying to get this child to actually vocalize open. It's really important to remember that this is so exhausting for kids. It takes a lot of patience from the adult, and it's really exhausting on the child as well, using a lot of energy to focus and attend when they don't necessarily have that shared attention. Some of the governing bodies, there are two, both of them are nonprofit organizations. Profectum is an organization that offers full programs to receive certification after about 10 to 12 months. These are one level at a time. So the levels for Profectum are broken up into categories, of level 1 would be that you are now a DIR Floortime provider. You can, after taking that 10 to 12 month course, you can legally say that you are a DIR Floortime provider. However, you are not able to then teach to parents, educate to other professionals, and you can't use that as a teaching certification. There are other certifications through Profectum that allow you to do these things. And then eventually you can become an actual educator where you're formally teaching DIR floor time to other clinicians that want to be certified. But those are all one level at a time. So each one takes about 10 to 12 months. The other governing body is the Interdisciplinary Council on Development and Learning, which is ICDL. So ICDL offers several courses in order of prerequisites. So that would be levels 101, 102, 202, etc., that you might take one by one. There's also a fast track for working professionals that have master's degrees. So that could be something to look into if you're interested. Again, all of these courses take a lot of time and they do cost money out of your own pocket. So from my personal experience, I went the ICDL route and I got my intro and level 1 DIR Floortime certification. Though I'm not technically a DIR Floortime provider quite yet, I do have experience with DIR Floortime because of these courses. So it's a really great way to implement it in my practice, but I cannot say that I'm legally a provider. So if you're looking for really getting that certification and being a provider, I would personally recommend going the Profectum route, as it offers that full-time program, and it is 10 to 12 months, but you only meet once or twice a week via Zoom to collaborate and discuss with your classmates and receive education from the teacher. The rest is it's built for practicing clinicians. So you would then submit recordings of you engaging with clients and then identifying their levels in a real life setting. So it's really hands-on. I want to offer some more collaboration time. This is kind of like a quiz. So what does the I stand for in DIR? What does the R stand for in DIR? Discuss the levels and try to think of an example for each. And then who is credited for creating DIR Floortime? So take some time and reflect on these, pause the webinar and come back and we can discuss it. Thanks for coming back. So what does the I stand for in DIR Floortime? That would be the individual differences. So these describe the unique ways in which a person takes in, regulates, responds to, and comprehends the world around them. What does the R stand for? The R stands for relationships, and this describes how relationships fuel our development because we're social beings. For the levels, we did talk about the 6 prominent levels, and those were 1, self-regulation, 2, engaging and relating, 3, intentionality and two-way communication, 4, complex communication and problem solving, 5, using symbols and creating emotional ideas, and 6, logical thinking and building bridges between ideas. Who is credited for creating DIR Floortime? And that would be Stanley Greenspan. So I also wanted to just explain a little bit before showing you more information. If we're looking at, I'm going to go back to the levels so that we have a visual. I'm going to give a real life example. So I have a client who is chronologically 7 years old, but typically falls between the category or the levels on the ladder of 1 all the way up to 3. So we have not quite gotten to shared problem solving quite yet in the circles of communication, but there are some. So we're kind of teetering on level 4. What happens in our sessions is we really like to swing. So the swing is really regulating. So we work on getting our body regulated, swinging, receiving that sensory input to allow him to engage in his environment. And then using purposeful interaction and connection by maybe I'll grab his feet and pull him, pull, and then I'll wait for him to look at me and then I'll let go. So that would be him engaging with me. Level 3, the two-way purposeful communication. I'm pulling his legs. I'm pulling. He's looking at me. I let go and then I stop. I'm still giving him that heightened affect that we really want to provide with DIR Floortime. And then he comes over to me and sticks his feet out so that I grab them. That would then be the purposeful two-way communication. And it would also be arguably a circle of communication because he's with me in that moment, telling me what his body needs, what he wants, and really trying to get me to engage with him. So that would be an example of fluctuating from level 1 to level 4. At any moment, he could go back down to just level 2 or just level 1. It just depends on the environment. It depends on his sensory processing needs. It depends on his emotional regulation. It depends on a lot of different things, specifically the developmental piece and the individual difference piece. So I'm going to flip back to some more information on DIR floor time. So on the left, there's a QR code for a video with Stanley Greenspan explaining DIR floor time. This is, I believe, around 6 minutes, and it's a really informative video just on him discussing it. It's a pretty old video, but it is still incredibly relevant to what we're talking about today. And then on the right side, there's a QR code for ICDL, which is, again, one of the governing bodies. They were lovely enough to create a one-page document that just really breaks down DIR floor time and explains the levels all in just one page. So if you'd like more information on DIR floor time from this webinar, please feel free to go to any of these QR codes. DIR floor time is really such an amazing approach, and it is so fun using your affect, your relationship, your emotional engagement, and the child's strengths and your own strengths really helps develop and strengthen all of the things that they need in order to engage in the world around them. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I thank you guys so much for attending and listening to my presentation. I did want to make a Kahoot, but unfortunately I would have to pay money to allow you guys to take the Kahoot. But I hope that the time that you spent with collaboration was helpful, and I really hope you guys consider implementing this in your further practice. Thank you for coming, and have a wonderful day.